We continue to celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day by talking about how he used his privilege despite adversity to help millions. Here to break it down for us, we welcome to the show, welcome back, Kemy Joseph is with us. Kemy, it's really good to see you. How are you doing?
So good to see you too, especially on a day like this where we honor Dr. King Jr. and we see what's happening in our country. It's an honor to be here and to connect with you again.
Yeah, it almost seems like a special year to be able to do this, to have this day.
Yeah, I mean, especially virtually. I mean, I think people are doing, I just came from facilitating a training as a replacement for a day of service and looking at the service we must do within in order to really be of service in the world outside.
Yeah, talk about, you talk a lot about racial equity. A lot of people have a different definition on that. I know we talked about this before on the show, but share what that really means.
Yeah, I like to ask people in groups when we're talking about this, like raise your hand if you like to be treated unfairly. And people look at me like, well, what are you talking about? It's like, yeah, no one wants to be treated unfairly, especially when it comes to being treated unfairly because of your skin color. And what's interesting is we're looking at this world of racial equity. People are asking to be treated fairly and giving a fair chance to live safely and thrive, which I believe a lot of us can agree on. And this is not about taking competition out of the conversation. We're not necessarily saying, hey, everybody gets a trophy for participating, but it's really asking to give people a fair chance to compete and to thrive in this world.
Can you talk about Martin Luther King Jr., what you see as lessons that we can take away and use today?
Yes, especially with this conversation being so massive. I love how he really focuses on making an impact where you have influence. And when I study him and I see what he did when he first began, he's working in the church and then worked in the boycott of Montgomery and then progressively kept building from there. So just reminding people that this is a massive conversation. Start where you have influence, and regardless of how involved you have been, I love what he talks about of that right now, it's always the right time to do the right thing. Right? Regardless of how much we've been involved or sometimes we've been uninvolved and disengaged, if you're just participating in this conversation, keep focusing on how you can do the right thing. If you've been involved in this movement for a long time, same applies. Focus on that right now is the right time to do the right thing.
One of his really many fabulous quotes. You know, we talk about this word privilege, and it's one of those words that we've heard a lot in this past year. You kind of flipped the switch on that a little bit. Can you talk about that word with Martin Luther King Jr. especially?
Yeah, and then when I look at Dr. MLK Jr., he had so many of the privileges that we talk about today as sometimes being toxic. Like, you know, he was born a male, he was cisgender, he was also straight, he was able-bodied, you know, he was Christian, English speaking. Like, these are some of the classic privileges that we are talking about in America. And some people are focused so much on blaming and shaming each other for the privileges we have versus what I love about him is he used every privilege he had to engage people and move folks towards a better world. And he also invited people to do the same from wherever they were starting. So, for example, in the boycott with Montgomery, he was saying that we're going to be walking. If you can't walk, we'll provide rides. So he asked people who had cars to share their vehicles. The churches started to buy cars and provide vehicles. People who had the taxi cabs were giving discounts so other people can ride along and be a part of this movement, this boycott. So regardless of what privilege you have, the conversation for me and for us in our organization is how do we use our privileges to advance racial equity? How do we use our privileges to make it more fair for people?
How do you feel that we do that?
Yeah, again, it depends on which privilege you're talking about. So, for example, one of mine is the privilege of having education, right? I was given a scholarship that allowed me to go and earn my 3 degrees you see on the wall behind me. So I want to be able to figure out how do I give more people access to education? How do I show up and make education more enjoyable when I'm working with kids? How do I make education more applicable when I'm working with adults? I know that for example, economics is a place where so many people get an opportunity to thrive. I run a business and I help other business owners look at how do we advance career equity, giving people a fair chance to work for us and with us and give them ability to grow economically. So there's just a couple of ways, but the point is when we focus on where we have influence and where we have privilege, we can hit the ground running versus being held back and afraid of doing the wrong thing.
As you hold these workshops, as you talk to people today after this past year, how do you think people feel now about everything, about racial equity in comparison to even a few years ago?
Well, I think we are both we're having a conversation way more, but we're also having it in a toxic way and in a way that's very confusing. again, I think people are focused on the shame and blame. And so I see a lot of people, when they see our refreshing take on it, they're like, whoa, I didn't know this conversation could be positive. I'm like, it absolutely can be positive, because we have to see that some of Martin Luther King's dream did come true. The fact that we're here today and we're talking, and we know we still have progress to make. So when we're focusing the conversation on progress, I see that people are more hopeful and people are more willing to continue being a part of doing what it takes to, again, increase fairness and increase equity in the world.
Well, anyone in your presence knows that you're extremely positive. I love this quote that you have. You can be someone's Martin Luther King Jr. Can you share a little bit more about what that means and how that's possible?
Yeah, I think it also touches on your other point, right? That nowadays, this conversation is so fragmented. We don't have a single Martin Luther King Jr. of 2020 or 2021, right? So for that being said, it's saying you as an individual person, that you can be someone's Martin Luther King Jr. by working on where you have influence and making positive change, that you can be someone's Martin Luther King Jr. by seeking to make the world fair for those who are feeling hurt and traumatized right now, that you can be someone's Martin Luther King Jr. regardless of your past or your current privilege, that you, by doing the right thing right now, can be someone's Martin Luther King Jr.
Always wonderful words. I love talking to you, Kemy. Thank you so much.